All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good trailhead. If there was a lot of information that I'm sure you guys are gathering, it's the end of the second day, you guys are tired, we'll try to keep it short and keep it really hands-on and give you a little bit more information how you can get started with building your mobile app. My name is Urvin. I'm a product manager on the Mobile SDK. With me, I have Wolf and Raj, who are developers and architect on the team. And this is a Salesforce presentation. Most of the things we'll be talking about today is generally available today to you, but there might be some things we might state, might be forward-looking. So please take that into account when making your purchase decisions. So what do we plan to cover today here is essentially give you a quick overview of the Mobile SDK. Out of curiosity, how many people are familiar with the Mobile SDK? All right, we have a few, and there's a lot of people who are new to it, so that's great. So we'll basically give you a quick introduction of what the SDK gives you out of the box, and then we will build a new app from scratch, which is going to be a native Swift app, and we will also make it offline available. And then we're going to show you an advanced feature around identity. So if you have looked at Facebook-like login experience, you could do that with the Mobile SDK against your Salesforce instance. But we are not sharing any of your data with Facebook, so you're fine. And then we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So let's just dive in. So we asked a lot of customers, and we looked at a lot of apps, and say, what is a good enterprise app? What are the good traits of an enterprise app? And 5 things basically stood out. One is user experience. I don't think anybody can argue about that, and they really want to. The users expect you to take advantage of all the device features that are available to you. Then is the data integration. We rarely are in situations where you are only operating on data from one cloud or one platform. You have to bring in data from multiple places so that the users can finish their task. If you have them go out to another experience, you'll see a lot of drop-offs in between. And then it's the offline. Connectivity in the US and around the world is getting better. But there are still use cases like hospitals, farms, where people have to work and they have really poor connectivity. And then notifications. This was the other thing that the users told, and the apps basically that had higher engagement was if the data is pushed to the users rather than have them go hunt for it. That tends to make the apps a lot more useful. That's what the users really like. Don't have me go and look at something. Just tell me I need to do something. Just makes it easy. And then we are dealing with enterprise data and enterprise security. And security is one of those things that we have to always be careful about. Data is money. So with that backdrop, we basically created the Mobile SDK to help you with all 5 of those, or at least 4 of those. The top layer, which is the UI experiences, whether you're building a native app or a hybrid app, both Apple, Google, and all the popular web frameworks give you a lot of tools out of the box to kind of get to build your UI. So we didn't think that there was a lot of help that we needed to provide there. There's already enough there for you. And we support all of these. So we support native app building or like hybrids if you want to use Swift, Objective-C, Kotlin, Java on that side, on the native side. We support all of it, and React Native and Cordova-based Ionic, Angular, we support all of that. But then that's the other 4 pieces that we basically decided to focus on. So for your offline access, we built Smart Sync and Smart Store. You get that out of the SDK. It is the synchronization engine that you have that allows you to sync your records from your phone to the server. And Smart Store is our solution for storing that data on the device itself. It is encrypted, and it is tied to user's identity. So as an admin, if you decide to revoke somebody's token, next time they basically come and they launch the app, we realize that token has been revoked, we would wipe off the data too. Goes back to a point of making sure that your data is secure and it's encrypted. And the other thing is all about user identity, and it's also tied to the Smart Store and how we store data. And identity is one of those critical pieces because it gives you who has access to what data, what permissions they have, and all of things are tied around who the user is. And with that, we gave you access to push notifications. To help you with data integrations, we built a REST client API that gets you access, that lets you, get your data from community, from force.com. You can access your files, and all of that functionality, you can bring all of that into your app. And if you need to manage your app through MDM, we also support that. So app config is what all the settings in app config are things that we support. And there are a lot of features that basically are built into the app, like using these basic principles and capabilities. And these are generally categorized or can be put into 3 big buckets. One around identity management. We support features like certificate-based authentication. So if you want to push a certificate down to your apps and only have devices that are approved or managed, you could do that through this. If you wanted to do community-branded login, we have support for that. If you wanted to use passcode or biometric to say, hey, after this time of inactivity, ask the user to present some credentials, not log them out, because logging out has a very different implication. It will wipe off your cache, and there is other side effects that happen to that. And there is deferred login. So if you're building a community-based app again, your users you may want to show them some data that is public, and you don't need them to log in. We allow you to do that as well. On the offline access side, we allow you to sync related records. So generally, in the past, it's never that you're only working on one object. You have relations that we want to maintain, and you want to work on them. So we allow you to sync all of those in a single shot as well. Conflict resolution, when you sync up the data, there might be conflicts. What do you want to do with that? We give you access to all of that, and we leave the decision up to you. And then to partition the data locally on the device, we support user and global soups. So that global soup is something that is available to everybody on the app, and user soup is only for that user. On the developer side, we basically are making constant improvements in our tooling. So in the latest releases, we added support for promises in Swift. We added debug helper screens to help you debug your app faster. We support composite and tree APIs. And along with all of that, we give you a lot of sample apps, templates, and documentations are available to you. So there's a lot of things that we give you to get you started on this journey. But with that, I'm going to bring in Wolf, who's going to show us how to build an app with Mobile SDK.
So hi, everybody. I'm Wolfgang. Oops. Sorry for that. I was wondering, can you guys hear me? Is it OK?
Yep.
All right, sorry for that. So let me show you how to build an app using Mobile SDK. So today we're going to focus on building a Swift application for iOS, but like Orvin mentioned, we support Android application as well, hybrid and React Native application. So the tool you would use for that is called Force iOS. It's just an NPM tool you download by doing an NPM install Force iOS. And then you have to pass a number of command line arguments, or if you don't know them, the first time you run the tool is going to tell you what possible options are available. So very simple. I just try the app name. I say, the bundle ID and things like that. And then it's going to start building. It's going to create an application for me, a fully functional application using Mobile SDK. So that might take a while depending on network. It has to pull a dependency, both Mobile SDK and the libraries will depend on. So let me switch straight to the end result of running that tool. So after running the tool, you end up with a Xcode workspace that contains your application. So before I look at the code, let's run the application and see what it does. So that's the simplest application we give you, but it also already demonstrates how to authenticate your Salesforce and talk to the backend to get the data you want. So let me run the application. Let's see. All right. So first time you launch the application, you will see a login screen come up. All right. So let me do a quick login so we can see what it actually does. I was making sure I was going against the sandbox. So I have a little test user here, TDX. And all right, nobody saw that. OK, so I approve. And then I guess the simplest of screens is just a table view, but that data is a list of users from my org. So let me jump into the code to show you how that works. So there's really 2 classes I want to talk about. One is the app delegate. So that's the entry point for any iOS application. So in the init method, I need to initialize what we call the SDK manager. That's the class responsible for all SDK-related operations. And there's a number of blocks of code you can specify. What do I do after initialization? What do I do after authentication? What do I do on logout? So default implementation just doesn't do a whole lot, just the bare minimum. So here I'm saying, OK, after I log in, the first thing I want to show is my root view controller. And then there's other things in there, like I mentioned, logout. You might need to do some cleanup on your own. For switching users, what we mean by that is out of the box with Mobile SDK, your application can support multiple users at the same time logged in into the application. We take care of managing the tokens for each one of them and separating the data for each one of them. So maybe you've noticed that in the Salesforce application, you can log in as multiple users to different orgs. If you want the same capability in your app, you don't have to do any work with Mobile SDK. All right, so let's now go into that other class, which is the root view controller, which is the only screen in that app. So that's the table view controller. If I look at the bottom of the class first, the usual stuff, how do I render each row? All it does really is get the data from that member called data rows. So the thing that's really of interest for us is how do we get the data here? And that's the code I'm going to highlight now. So starting in Mobile SDK 6.0, we added a Swift SDK. So it's a Swift library that gives you promise-based API. So it's a lot easier to read the code. So what I do here is I say, OK, give me that object called SF REST API. That's the object responsible. That's the object through which you talk to the server. And I say, OK, build me a SQL query, and then send the requests. And then when you're done, simply put that data into that member variable called data rows and ask the table at the end to re-render itself. Very simple. So it should be noted that when you use that REST API object, you don't have to worry about access tokens, right? So we would take care of adding the bearer tokens to the request. If the server gives you a 4.1 because the session expired, we use the refresh token that's stored securely in the keychain to refresh, and then we replay your request. So for you, it just works every time. All right, so that's the basic app that simply goes to the server and gets some data using SQL. So now what we want to do is modify this app and make it offline first. So let me first explain what I mean by offline first. The idea here is that your application is going to mostly talk to its local store, and then you're going to use synchronization to bring data from the remote store from Salesforce into your local store. So on one side, you're going to set up your synchronization. On the other side, you have an application that's only talking to local database, which means that when the application is offline, you don't have any kind of logic in your app that says, OK, if I'm offline, if the network doesn't work, do this or do that. You just talk to the local store. So those concerns of being offline or online is something for the synchronization engine to deal with. All right, so how do we add a local store to that application? So we made that easier in Mobile SDK 6.0. We added a way to do that through configuration file. So what I'm going to do is simply drag and drop a file here. Make sure it gets added to the target, right? And this file has the schema. So Irvin mentioned Smart Store. One of the key features of Smart Store is, so instead of calling the table, we call table soups. And the reason for that is the rows don't have to have the same shape. And the reason for us doing that is on the server, we have a very flexible data model, right? You can add field and objects on the fly, and you want the app to handle that gracefully, right? You shouldn't break the client app just because a new field showed up. So what you end up doing basically when you set up a soup is only you specify what you really need to have in that soup. And new fields can appear, disappear. They'll be accessible. They'll be available to the app, but they won't break the app. So here I say I really need to have ID name and that field local. Last one is used for synchronization engine, and ID name is what you expect. All right, so now I have the store set up. Let me do the same thing for synchronization. So we did the same thing. We have a new config file-based approach to doing that. Of course, you can do it programmatically as well. It would be a few lines of code. For user syncs, again, I define all my synchronizations. So they come in two types, sync down and sync up. Sync down is bringing data from the remote server to the local database, and sync up is when you go the other way. And then you say, what am I targeting on the server? And one of the ways to target objects is through SOCL. We also support social, MRU. You can also target records with their children. And you can also define your own custom targets. So you can subclass the existing target and then maybe go talk to an Apex REST endpoint. You can talk to Heroku. So people have done that, actually. And the last one is about how do you handle, let's say I'm syncing on data and I have some locally modified records I haven't saved to the server yet. Do I want to lose them? Do I want to write over them? And that's what you use the merge mode for. Okay, so just having those files there is not actually going to create the store, you have to add 2 lines of code. Let me just do that. So let me have this. I'll copy. It's 2 lines of code, but I'm lazy. So there's 2 lines of code that you run at the appropriate time to say, hey, set up my store from my config files. You might do that. So because those stores are user-specific, you need to do that after you log in. So let me go back to the app delegate. And let's go back into that block of code where we're setting up the root view controller. Well, the thing I'm going to do right before is just those 2 lines of code. Okay, set up the user store from the default config and set up the user sinks from the default config. We also support global store and global sinks. Those would be available. So you would have a global store that's available across users and also available when you log out. So that would be typically data that's not org-specific. It could be data that is shared by users. For instance, the events app is using Smart Sync, and they usually put event data. There's some data they put in the global store because it's really not specific to that user. And the user data would contain, what session you want to attend and things like that. The global store will contain session data, which is publicly available. All right, so now if I run the app now, all right, so right now we have the sync set up. I'm not running the sync. So let me first run the sync so that the data gets actually pulled down from the server. For that, I'm going to make a little change to my root view controller. Let's go back in here, root view controller. So I'm going to get rid of the old method for loading the view and replace it with a new one. And let me go over the code really quickly. So okay, so first I'm getting a pointer to the store at the sync manager. Let me add a couple imports now so that the compiler doesn't complain. So no, it doesn't. Okay, smart. So let's compile while I look at the code. Okay, so I'm getting a reference to my store and sync manager. And the only thing I do right now is to say, okay, so when first loading the view, let's make sure to run the sync, which has been named in the config file. So you notice that we sync call. So the sync manager offers really 3 APIs: sync up, sync down, and resync. Sync down is to do what you expect. Sync up also what the name says. And resync is something you can use to rerun an existing sync. Or if you call resync for something you never run, it's just going to do the full sync. And the advantage of resync subsequently is to not get all the data from the server. So it does a delta sync. So if the first time you run a sync, it's going to get every record you specify in your so-called target. For instance, when you do resync, it's only going to get the records that got updated, modified, or created since the last one. So you might be syncing up 50,000 records first time around. Might take minutes, whatever. And then after that, you only get whatever changed since the last thing. So it's very efficient to use. All right, so let's just try this app right now. All right, let's rerun it. You bring up the simulator. It's rebuilding again. Okay, of course. All right, so Xcode has decided to be slow on me, so I'm going to kill it.
It's not Flash. Right. It's really working.
Really? All right, let's bring back the workspace. And let's run the app. All right, hopefully it's going to be better this time. Yep, this time it launched right away. All right, so the app was logged in previously. This is still true. Now you notice there's nothing showing there. We'll get to that. But now what I really want to see is that, okay, did the sync really happen? How do I know? I want to look at the database, but I don't want to write any code again. I could, do a query and dump stuff to the console. So what we did in Mobile SDK 6.0 is add a dev support dialog. So dev support dialog are automatically there in debug build and disabled in release build. And programmatically, you can either enable them all the time or disable them all the time. So if you do the check gesture, or for me, it's going to be a shortcut key for that, there's a pop-up that shows up anywhere in the app if you use Mobile SDK. The first action is something like showing you all the information, SDK version, a SQL Cipher version, MDM settings if you have any. So that can be very useful. You have an app on device, people say it doesn't work, you can quickly check, wait, what build did you pick up? Those, by the way, those actions and that information in that first screen can be extended by the developer. It's very easy to do. Then you have actions we felt were very useful. Log out, switch users. You build an app, I don't have my UI yet for logging out, maybe I need to try that already. You can do that right away by clicking log out, switch user. And then the last one is inspect Smart Store. And depending on the app type, you might get more actions, and we might add more in the future. So that menu might change depending on the version of the SDK you're using. So inspect Smart Store is a simple screen to look at the Smart Store. If I look at the soups here, so it's showing me the query is running to show that data, which is a query you can run yourself against Smart Store. I'm listing the list of soups, and I see 1 has 34 rows. So the sync did happen. Those users got downloaded to the database. But they're not showing up in the app. All right, so let's do that last. So, of course, the reason they're not showing up in the app is I'm no longer setting up data rows. So the table view is based on data rows. Right now, I'm running a sync, but I'm never going to the database to get that data. So let's just add that line of code now. All right, so again, I'm going to copy some code. So what we're going to do is, again, back in the same class. So when I'm running the sync, so I'm doing two things here. So all I added is this line, right, saying once the sync complete, again, it's promise-based, so you run a sync, once yes, complete. I haven't put the method yet, so we'll get to that next. So it's okay, as soon as sync completes, make sure to read the data back from the store. And you notice I'm also reading the data back from the store when you first get into the method. So why am I doing it twice? So the reason is here, when you load the view, that first method is going to run, right? The other one is waiting for the server and so on and so forth. So you're going to get the cache data from the store, so the user will see data right away. And then the sync will happen to get freshest data from the server. If it completes, then it's going to refresh the view. If it doesn't complete, let's say because you were offline, then it's fine. You're seeing the most recent data you could get to. All right, so the last thing really we have to do now is to implement the load from store. Let me, again, do a little copy here. And we'll go through the code together. So I go here. All right, so all I do is I'm defining a query. So this is a query to talk to Smart Store. You have different query type, but the most powerful one is what we call Smart SQL. It's really like SQL, except that when you refer to soups or path, you have to use curly braces because the underlying table is not actually using those names. So here I'm saying I want the name from the user table, and I want to get 100 of them. And then you notice that the actual execution of the query is against promise-based, very similar to when we did the so-call against the server. So against the server, I say I want to build a query, send a request. Here I say I want to run a query. And then once I'm done, I have pretty much the same code I had before, which is get the data rows, get the data from the result set, put that into data rows, and then simply ask the table to reload itself. So now if I run the app once more, I hope it doesn't make me wait again. It should show data. And we see many more rows than before because it's up to 100 users being shown. All right, so that's all I have for today. Just to recap really quickly, so I used Force iOS to build the app, and I got a fully functional app that can do login and talk to the server. And then I made it offline by adding a store and synchronization. That was just done by dropping a couple of config files and a couple of lines of code. And then I switched my view from talking to the server to talking to local store. And the code was very similar, just going from so-called to whatever, Smart SQL. All right, thank you. And now we're going to get to demo number 2. All right, I'll close this. Oops.
Thanks, Wolf. Hi, everyone. I'm Raj Rao, and I'm a developer on the Mobile SDK team. So Wolf just showed you how to build good user experience or in your apps using Mobile SDK by going offline. I'm going to talk to you about an advanced feature that we have added for identity management in the Mobile SDK 6.0. What this feature does is allows, if you're in the situation that you're building multiple apps for users, and you don't want to, we could all agree that having users to log into every single app constitutes a really bad experience. With this feature now, the identity management feature, you can designate one app as an identity provider app and have the other apps delegate that authentication to the app. So basically, your user is kind of logged in. once, and that's kind of, we reuse those credentials and through the identity provider app. And what I'll start with first is showing you a demo, and then we'll dive into the code that is required to enable this feature. So quickly, I'm going to bring up the auth demo. This is just a sample app. I'm just going to run it, a different simulator. Show you what it looks like. So this is an app that I have designated as a identity provider app. Okay, all it does is manage users and apps. That's all. It doesn't do anything more. It doesn't have to be this way. You can enable this feature in an existing app that that's got functions that's beyond just identity management. But for the sake of the demo, we've kind of simplified it to this being just an authenticator app. There's also another app, which is our Smart Sync Explorer. And what that does is shows a bunch of contacts. It pulls up these contacts from the server and shows it to you. But that will be the app that will request for authentication through the Authenticator app. So I'm going to pull that up, and I'm going to push a button that says log in with that Authenticator app. So the moment I do it, it swizzles into the other app. That's the Authenticator app. If you notice here, you'll see a little a sign on the top here which says, go back to Smart Sync Explorer. It's telling you it's in a different app. So this screen is coming out of the Authenticator app. And Wolf just mentioned that we support multiple users, so shared devices. And just to make this demo a little bit more interesting, on the Authenticator side, I'm showing you all the users here. You get to pick which user. I'll log in as Charlie. And it should log you in right. So you're back in the Smart Sync Explorer showing all the contacts. So I didn't type in username, I didn't type in password. Happened sometime before, right? And we kind of leverage that fact. So it constitutes to a lot better user experience across, especially if you have multiple apps. You could have a contacts app, an accounts app, healthcare app, whatnot, benefits app, right? And they could leverage the same feature. Now, there's another flow yet. Perhaps this authenticator can be even more interesting if we can launch apps from within it, right? Some of the other client apps in the context of a current user. So for example, here, right now, the current user is Sam. So what I'm going to do is launch that very app, Smart Sync Explorer, as Sam. And it swizzles back and forth. Basically, it's getting permissions across. But on the Smart Sync Explorer, you will see two users now, but your current user is Sam. So this is a feature that you can easily add to your apps, and I'm going to show you what does it take from coding standpoint once you get the Mobile SDK 6.0 and integrate that in your project. What does it take to actually enable this feature? So let's start it from the Smart Sync Explorer itself, from this app, the client app. What does it take to enable an app? Let's say I'm aware of an authenticator app or an identity provider app that's already out there. How do I enable my client app to actually delegate this authentication? So I'm going to bring up our sample. By the way, Smart Sync Explorer is a sample app on the Mobile SDK. You can pull it, play with it. The font sizes are... Is it legible, guys? I think it looks OK. All right, so as usual, you go down to the app delegate. App delegate is the entry point for your application, right? And this is Objective-C code. Anyone familiar with it should not be kind of lost looking at this code. And all you need to do here is just add this one line which says, hey, Salesforce SDK manager, I'd like to configure an external app as my identity provider. So you need to put that scheme in there. Now that scheme needs to be declared in your P list. You need to have a connected app, and we have some great documentation that's available that will kind of, you can follow in steps to actually set it all up. But from the coding standpoint, that's all you need to do. You need to just enable that one line, right? Now, also on you might have noticed that, when this screen, which says login with, IDP application or login locally, that's a screen that's customizable. You can completely change that. Okay, you can make this your own. The way to do it is these 3 lines of code, which says, hey, give me a login view controller, and that's the one that I'm going to use, or give me a view controller, that's the one I'm going to use to actually display it to the user. And you just notify the SDK of actions that occur in that login view controller. So you could lay it out however you want, make it more fancy, but you just tell us when you need to launch the external app. So for that, let me quickly show you what the code for that looks like. This is a simple nav view controller. It implements the SF SDK login flow selection view. That's all it does, right? And what we do is we set ourselves up, the mobile SDK, as a delegate into your view controller. And when the actions occur, all you have to do is notify us, okay, of the particular action that needs to be taken. So on the SmartSync Explorer side, on the client side, that's all you need to do. It's as simple as that. Now, how about the authenticator side, right? If I were to build an identity provider app or designate some app as an identity provider, what do I need to do? So this example that I've been showing here, this authenticator app, is actually a template, and you can start off from a template. So we don't want you to start off from scratch. There's a template that's available, and as Wolf showed you just a few minutes ago, how to use the Force iOS tool to actually generate a Swift app. I'm going to use the very same command to create a authenticator app. So I'm not going to type all the parameters in there, but pretty much all that I need to do is let me paste it here. And all it's saying is create a authenticator app from a template that's available in our GitHub repos for authenticator, give it a name, so on and so on, enter, and it starts building that app. Now, what does the app actually look like? It's a Swift app. I'm going to bring that up real quick. Okay. What am I clicking on? Let me do it another way. What's here? There it is. All nested in. So open up. Oh, it was open. That's why it didn't keep it open. It just should have switched, but here. So in the identity provider app, again, one line that is required is basically a Boolean that says this is an identity provider app. Now, that's all you need to do. Again, there are some screens that are customizable, just like on the client-side app. You can quickly, the user picker, one with multiple users, you can customize that screen and make it your own. That's all it takes to actually get started with this feature. There's a lot of documentation out there. You can follow those steps and get started. So to quickly recap, if you are building multiple apps for users, is a really good feature to have. It's available on Android and iOS both, and all different flavors. With that, I'm going to wrap up my session and hand it over to.
Yeah, so thank you. So let's just go back to the presentation. I just wanted to share some of the resources that are available to you. So we have Trails. If you are looking to get started with your mobile journey, you're not familiar with the mobile SDK, we have Trails, which will get you set up, get you on with your building your hybrid or native apps. We also have a homepage where you can get access to all the resources. SDK is an open source project, so you get access to all the source code, and you can inspect the way you want and modify if needed. And then we have a Google community where we tend to answer almost any questions that come our way. We try to be really proactive on that. And all the steps that Wolf did during his demo, there's a README, all the Swift file, like steps that he took are also available there. So hopefully that will get you started. Questions? Sure. Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is for the hybrid app does also have the can hybrid app access all these capabilities you just demoed?
Yes. So you could base like the identity feature that we have is also available on hybrid or like native apps. Even for the same smart sync and offline capabilities are also available on the hybrid app.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Question for Wolfgang. So the resync function, does that also handle records that may have appeared to the user because of sharing rule changes where the record itself wasn't actually edited?
So we have a clean resync ghosts call, separate API, I guess that's the fourth one. If you need to clean up records that are locally there but should no longer be seen by the user. So a separate call. We didn't put the two calls together because we think maybe the app doesn't need to do that as often. It's a more expensive call to do because basically the server doesn't keep track of things you used to be able to see. So we have to collect the IDs you have, collect the IDs you should get, and do a diff. So it's more expensive call. It's a separate API.
Cool. Any other? Sure.
For the authentication, you use one app to log in. Then for other apps, does this also support the BlackBerry access?
Oh, BlackBerry.
Not BlackBerry 2, not BlackBerry
The device, but
BlackBerry store the authentication.
Oh. So you can. It's basically the protocol or the line between the two apps is like as long as the interfaces are kind of implemented, it would work. But like the most likely the BlackBerry portion of it will not have the SDK in it. So all the handling needs to be built within that custom app. So the thing that we don't do here, just to be very clear, is like we don't really share tokens across the two apps. What we share, or we basically use logged in state from one and generate an auth code from the platform and then pass the auth code. So the credentials are never shared, the tokens are never shared across the two. And that gives us the ability to like give you or offer you as an admin to say, this user needs to have access to this versus this does not, and you can individually manage each of these apps. Anything else? All right, we're on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.